Hi everyone, and welcome back to another video. So if you seen on my Instagram earlier this week, I did some playing around with splash photography for the first time, and so I quite enjoyed it. And so I wanted to just have a sit down and chat about, what is splash photography, how you can do it at home, how to use the Olympus Pro Capture and sequential high, and sort of my final review notes from playing around with splash photography. Alright, so splash photography, it's essentially in the name. You are creating splashes with the liquid and capturing them. I don't know how else to explain it. It doesn't necessarily have to be what I did. So what I did is I bought these clear glass mugs from HomeSense, and then I was dropping ice cubes and carrots in it to create the splashes. You could do it with balloons. I've seen photos where people have a larger body of water and they're dropping like fruit and vegetables into it, so you don't have to do what I did. But since this was the first time trying it, I wanted to stick with this concept. But that's that's basically what splash photography is. I also wanted to play around with using the Pro Capture feature on the Olympus versus sequential high, which is another just feature on the Olympus camera. And so I played around with that. And for any of you that don't know what Pro Capture is on the Olympus, it's essentially a feature that you can enable on some of the Olympus cameras. If you enable it on your camera, when you have pressed the shutter, it starts recording images to whatever you have your settings to. And then when you fully press the shutter, it starts writing. So it just allows you to capture these moments that really last briefly. And so it's a nice feature for like sports photography, wildlife photography, splash photography, like any sort of photography where the moments are lasting really, really briefly. So let me show you how to enable and change the settings within Pro Capture real quickly if you don't know how to do that. Alright, so to turn on Pro Capture on the Olympus, just go into your Super Control menu and just either go to Pro Capture High or Pro Capture Low. For this, I went to Pro Capture High. If you want to change the settings within Pro Capture, just go into Menu and go down to the settings and C1. And then here you can change your low settings or your high settings. So I went into Pro Capture High, so I'm just going to go into the Pro Capture High settings. And I think by default, this one might be sitting at 15, and I bumped it up to 60 frames per second. And then you can also change your pre-shutter frames, which is how many is taken during that period before you click the shutter. And so I set mine to 15, and I want to see maybe the standard or the default is 10. So I just went with 15. You can also change your frame count limiter, which is your total frames. And so I think by default it's not 45. I set mine to 25 during the photos, but I think really 45 would have been a better number for me. But this is how you can go in and change the settings within Pro Capture. And then if you want to go and do sequential high instead of Pro Capture, just go back into that Super Control menu. Instead of Pro Capture High, I just go down to sequential high, and I prefer that it is not the sequential silent, but the sequential high here. Alright, so when I did my splash photography earlier this week, this is what my setup was. So I had my Manfrotto tripod set up near the kitchen table, and I had my Olympus EM1 Mark II with the 12 to 40 millimeter lens on it. So I had my glass in front of my dark backdrop, and then I was using natural light for this, and it was casting a pretty harsh shadow, so I ended up taping some parchment paper to the window just to diffuse that light a little bit. And for the majority of all of the photos, my settings in camera were an ISO 800, a shutter speed of 1/500, and an aperture of f2.8. So at first I started doing test shots with actually just a glass of water and some ice cubes using Pro Capture, and then after after my test shots, I moved in my coffee and started shooting with that and trying also Pro Capture and sequential high. After about maybe halfway through, I switched to using carrots to do my splashes, and then the last set of images I switched back to using ice cubes. It's just I started to run out of ice cubes and I wanted to keep some for the very end of the photo shoot. So I had some baby carrots in my fridge, and I did want to play around with like different objects and heights to drop it at to kind of see what kind of splashes it creates. And so I did that about halfway through the shoot. So I'm going to show you some of the results from doing this splash photography for the first time. So I wanted to share some final review notes from trying splash photography for the first time. So one of the things that I did learn and try out is the different levels of which I filled my glass with. When I was doing my test shots, I was leaving a little bit of room at the top and I wasn't filling the glass all the way to the top. And so I eventually started filling the glass a little bit higher with whatever liquid I was using. And I found that when I was doing that, it just added more like length and volume to the splashes than when your glass is like a little bit more empty, which makes sense. The second thing that I played around with was the height of the drop. So I played around with how high basically I was dropping the ice cube or the carrot into my glass to see if it would affect the height and the volume, and I did also find that that affected the height and volume of my splashes. The third thing that I did also experiment with is the object that I was dropping into my glass, an ice cube versus a carrot, and you can really see the difference. So in this photo, I was using a carrot to do the splash with, and you can kind of see that I dropped it at a pretty horizontal drop because you can kind of see the two splashes that is being created, versus this one I used 2 ice cubes just kind of like back to back, so you can really see the difference also the object you were dropping makes. The fourth thing that I did find when I was playing around with splash photography and also Pro Capture on the Olympus camera is that because I haven't really played around with Pro Capture a lot, and this was the first time I was really trying it out, I found it was a little difficult to use and to get the timing still right. So I did fiddle with my settings, my Pro Capture settings quite a bit, but I was just finding it hard to get the timing right of when to half click the shutter, drop the object, fully click the shutter. Like I was just having a hard time doing it, kind of multitasking in that way. So I did find that when I switched to using sequential high on the Olympus camera, it was a little bit easier, and I think it's because the feedback that you get from the camera just helps you cue when to do some things. And lastly, you know, splash photography, it's super messy, so make sure that you are using like a surface that cleans up really nicely, and make sure you've got either paper towel or towels that you can use to clean up after, because it does make like a huge mess. All right everyone, so that is everything for today's video. Like I said earlier, you can use the Olympus Pro Capture feature for like wildlife photography, sports photography. You can even use it for landscape photography if you're trying to capture like the leaves falling or something like that. I want to try in the future doing this photo shoot with local products, so picking up some, you know, local juices, just any local wine or local products to do this photography with. So there's a couple things that I do still want to do with this. So if you don't follow me on Instagram, I'll leave a link in the description below, because I do try to post to my YouTube weekly on Saturdays, but I post to my Instagram stories and just my general posts a lot more over on Instagram, sharing, you know, all of the behind the scenes photos and stuff like that. So definitely I'll leave a link in the description below. If you do this at home, please be sure to document and share what you create over on Instagram and tag Beautifully Wonder, because I'd love to see what you create. Thank you everyone for watching today's video. If you liked it, please hit that like button below, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a video with me, and I'll see you in the next one.